Good morning, my friends. All right, let's open our Bibles up to Exodus chapter 3. I've already had the question today, which I think is fantastic. Just so you know, there is no error in the bulletin. We are actually going from chapter 3, verse 1 to chapter 4, verse 17. That is the plan, at least. So, all right, friends, here we go. Exodus chapter 3. This chapter is going to show us a lot that we can generally relate to in our life. I wonder. I know I've had this experience. I wonder if you've ever had the experience where an opportunity was kind of put in front of you, a chance to do something that was radical for the Lord, and yet for some reason or the other, there has always been some reason why you ought not, should not, or could not do that particular thing. It can be good reasons, it can be bad reasons, or it can just be excuses. In some way or the other, for all of us as Christians, there are going to be times in our lives as we grow and mature in Christ where the Lord's going to put something in front of us that is far too big for us. And our first response, because it is far too big for us, is to say, no, I don't want that. You see, what I've learned about Christianity and Christians in general is I've very rarely met a believer who does not want to possess a radical faith. I have, however, met many believers who were unwilling to embrace the change that is required in order to actually possess a radical faith. You see, what's happening in chapter 3 and chapter 4 is that God is going to do great work in Egypt. He is about to do some insane things. It's going to be so awesome, I cannot wait. It's going to be just fantastic. But you know what has to happen first? He's got to do some massive things in Moses, his servant. He's already moved him. We've seen God in his providence do this work to get him out to Midian, where he's serving as a shepherd for 40 years. And as we pick up in chapter 3, verse 1, that's where we start. The thing that I want us to see today is this. I hope that I'm speaking to a room full of people that desire to possess a radical, earth-shaking faith. Here's how you do it. You have to start not by, in this chapter, looking at Moses, not by, in your life, looking at your circumstances. It starts with really grasping the view of God. Really beholding God is the key to a radical obedience. Because if you have a small God, you're going to have a small obedience and a small faith. But if you have a big God, you have this God, I mean, we're going to see some incredible things this week, right? There's a reason we're going from chapter 3 all the way through chapter 4. I mean, these are some of the high water marks of the whole Bible, and I am well aware of this. As I've labored in this text this week, we're going to go through the burning bush. We're going to go through God revealing his covenant name to his people. But see, all of this, it's all one conversation. The Old Testament is very unlike the New Testament in that sometimes if you're going to learn and listen rightly, you have to listen to a whole conversation between two people. And sometimes that takes a while. And so we got a lot of ground to cover, which means I have to talk really fast. But in all of it, here's what I want us to see. I want us to see God, because that's what the book of Exodus wants us to see, and that's what the book of the Bible wants us to see. But as we see him, it's going to, Lord willing, it's going to change us. It's going to help us to see how we can overcome fear, how we can overcome hesitation, and really embrace a radical faith. But here's what it starts with. Embracing this radical faith, that as we think about this, starts with really just getting a glimpse of the glory of God. So we ended chapter 2, you may remember, with Moses in Midian, right? He's keeping watch over the flock of Jethro. So look with me at chapter 3, verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the field of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now we got a lot of Bible verses, so you're going to be sure to keep your Bible open with me. Okay, so it's not a small thing to trust somebody with your flock, and yet Jethro, his pa-in-law, trust him to take the flock and go all the way over to the other side of the wilderness. So he does. Now, there are probably a great many things that Moses was expecting that day. He was probably expecting some runaway sheep. He may have been expecting some predators. I'm pretty sure he was not expecting what we get in verse 2. Look at verse 2. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. Now, there's a whole separate sermon there. A few years from now, I'll do on this angel of the Lord theme. We've seen this happen in Genesis. We've seen it happen in Exodus. We'll see it happen several other places in the Old Testament. The angel of the Lord being associated with the Lord himself. And there are many that believe that this is an appearance of the pre-incarnate Christ. I think there's a lot of merit to that view, but here's what I know. When Moses saw the bush that was burning and yet not consumed, that's not what he said. He didn't say, oh, this must be Jesus, because he didn't know who Jesus was. And so we got to keep going, looking specifically at what Moses was seeing here. Moses is probably not thinking this, so we go on. Verse 3, Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned, which seems sensible, right? This is what you do. Now look at verse 4. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then he said, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. So God, for the first time in all right at 400 years, is speaking audibly to one of his servants. The last time we heard God speak audibly was in a vision to Jacob, because Jacob was terrified about going down to Egypt. It's been a long time. And the Lord speaks to Moses, and he tells him to come closer for a second. He says, do not come. He says, do not come closer. I'm sorry. Now listen. Here, listen to the instructions here. Moses gets close. God says, don't come near. Now why is that? Because God is holy. And for Moses to come too close to the holiness of God would have been for him to be consumed by the holiness of God. Now we'll get to spend a lot of time on this when we talk through the tabernacle in the book of Exodus, right? You're going to see a whole lot about the holiness of God and how important the holiness of God is, not just for the Old Testament saints, but for us, right? But then he says, take your shoes off. Why? Well, it was a sign of reverence that seemed to have carried on for a long, long time, that priests would commonly take their shoes off as a sign of kind of their humanness, if you will. They were from the dirt, and so their feet are connected to the dirt. But then he says, don't come any closer. Now, it's really important here. Moses didn't get to come any closer to the holiness of God just because he took his shoes off. He was still supposed to stop right there. God is not only bringing Moses in through this sight, he's also protecting Moses at the same time, because Moses does not know what he's getting into. We're going to see this at the end of chapter 4. Moses really does not understand the holiness of God. All right, and he's going to. We'll see it as time progresses. But there's a question here. Why a burning bush? Why did God appear as a burning bush? Now, God will appear often, even in this book, as fire to Israel. We're going to see this happen a lot. It's one of the common ways that God condescends to humanity in revealing to us something about his nature, right? The holiness of God, in many ways, is similar to fire. You see, fire can purify. When we want to purify gold or silver, what do we put to it? Fire, right? But it can also destroy. It can cleanse as we cauterize a wound, but it can also burn and hurt. If handled wrongly, fire can destroy. We're going to see this in the book of Leviticus with two guys named Nadab and Abihu who bring strange fire before the Lord. It's very significant, that picture, right? Because fire is a picture of the very holiness of God. So if that ever has puzzled you as you've read through Leviticus, we should be right about there in our annual Bible reading plans, somewhere close, right? So it's a fascinating passage, but that's not the passage I'm preaching, so we're going to keep going. So fire is all of these things. And so when you learn to build a campfire, you should learn, and if you haven't, welcome to Campfire 101. I'll be your instructor today. In order for a fire to burn, it needs three things. You guys know what it is? It needs heat, it needs oxygen, and it needs fuel. That's right. But the fire that's in the bush doesn't need those things. That's the substantial part of it being in a bush, and the bush is not consumed. This is a fire that doesn't need fuel, right? God is demonstrating himself as self-sufficient. He doesn't need anything in this universe to exist. He's demonstrating himself as holy, and so having the ability to purify, and he's demonstrating himself as dangerous. Now, we don't often think of God in those categories, right? We sometimes can get a little too chummy with God, but this is how he's describing himself. Look at verse 6. He said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And now, very important, look at Moses' response. Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Well, I mean, yeah, sure, of course he was. And so would we if we have a right response to this, right? Holy, powerful, self-sufficient, dangerous. This is the God that will redeem Israel from her enemies. This is the God that will take them out of Egypt. And sometimes we can miss this aspect of God. Ed mentioned in Equip class the other day how our tendency is to think of God as some elderly old grandpa in the sky in a rocking chair. Let me tell you something. You can't read the book of Exodus and think that way about God. Our God is a consuming fire. He is holy. He is powerful. He is, before I can way of putting it, masculine. This is God. This is who He is. And He reveals Himself this way to Moses so that Moses will see this and know this, and that's why a burning bush. The God who is self-sufficient, holy, and dangerous is working everything out according to His divine plan. This is what He's doing. And now we see the character. He's going to give Moses a very high summary of what's getting ready to happen. Look at verse 7. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. Now hold on a second. When you're reading a passage in the Bible, one of the more helpful ways to understand what the Bible's teaching is called tracking the verbs, the action words. What are the action words telling us in any given passage? They help us to understand a lot more about what the Bible's saying. Now look at what he says here. He says, I have surely seen. Then he says, I have heard their cry. And he says, I know their sufferings. Now if that all sounds kind of familiar, it should, because at the end of chapter 2, these are the things that the people of Israel are doing. They are crying out to God. God hears them. God knows. God sees. And so God says, I have surely seen. I have really seen. I have seen, exclamation point. I have heard their cry. God hears the groaning of His people, and He knows their suffering. He remembered as the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He saw, He heard, He knew, and now the time is coming where God will do something about it. Look at verse 8. He says, I've heard their suffering, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. And I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Woo, I have come down. It's like when you're a kid and your mom says, wait till your dad gets home. Right? The Lord has come down, and He is prepared to act. What? To deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. They're going to be freed from their slavery, to bring them up to a land of milk and honey. No more laboring for somebody else's milk and honey. They're going to be coming into a land where they will get to see these things for themselves. And so, let's stop for just 1 second. Look at all this and summarize what Moses' day was up to this point. Can you imagine going home and your wife says, how was your day? Right? I mean, so far, he headed out to the far side of the desert under the auspices of tending sheep. But in reality, God in His providence was sending him to the mountain of God, where we will be several times in the book of Exodus, where he will behold the presence of the all-sufficient living God, where he will hear of God's heart for His people, and then hear of God's plan for His redemption. This day did not go how Moses thought it was going to go at all. In other words, God's plan of redemption is advanced by Moses getting a glimpse of the glory of God. Moses is brought before the presence of the Lord so that he could get just a taste of the glory of the Lord. And so it is for all ministry. So it is for all radical faith. The Lord has allowed me a few years now to be in His service, in ministry, and in that time, I've seen people start things and stop things. I've watched men fall and fail. I've seen people who started with a zeal for a ministry and seem to almost wither on the vine. But the reality is no one ever withers on the vine. They wither because they've separated themselves from the vine. The truth of the fact is, whether it's pastoral ministry or a ministry that God's called you to do here in this church, the reality of this is Tozer says it this way, whatever comes to your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. Whatever comes to your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. That dictates everything from how you view your current vocation to your level of contentment and satisfaction, to the things that you say yes or no to in this life, to the risks that you are willing or unwilling to take. And when we lose that image, or the image becomes distorted, it creates this ripple effect that changes everything else in our life and ministry. And so what God is doing is He's bringing Moses into His presence so that Moses can see this God. And so for us, we want a radical faith. It starts with beholding. We're going to sing this song at the end. It's just perfect. Behold our God, seated on His throne. Who is God? Is the first question you have to answer when you're thinking about, am I called? The first question that you have to answer with, should I do this? Or should I be in that? Or should I use my time here? The first question must be, who is God? Is He this God? Is He the all-consuming fire? Is He the God who will come and strike His enemies? Is He the God who condescends to come and be before us? And if He is, that's going to change everything about how you spend the rest of your life. It's going to change everything about how you spend your time and your energy. It's going to change everything about what you're willing to sacrifice for. It's going to change everything about what you're willing to give up and what you're willing to take on. The first question must always be, who is God? Which would be a great place to land a plane, but God didn't land a plane here, so we got to keep going. Right? So now, the conversation's got to change, because so far Moses is loving everything that God is saying. Look at verse 10. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Now, everything sounded amazing to Moses all the way up till that sentence. And now all of a sudden it sounds far less amazing, because it sounds great that God's going to redeem His people. It sounds great that God's going to do all these incredible things, and He's going to reveal Himself. He's going to bring His glory about on the nations. He's going to reveal His name. He's going to free His people. It all sounds awesome, except for the fact that He wanted to use Moses for it. Now Moses is far less amazed. Boy, that sounds familiar, right? Like, we all like ministries, but laboring for ministries is something different, right? Like, that's where he's at. He's heard that all these great things await, but then you get here, all right? And what Moses is going to learn, and he is learning, is that it's a lesson for us as well, that when you get that glimpse of the glory and the holiness of God, it is definitely so that we can glorify Him and enjoy Him forever. But let me tell you what part of glorifying Him is. It's serving. It's doing. It's radical obedience. Moses is going to have to learn a little bit more about who God is. So God has revealed His glory here. But now He's going to reveal His name. And that's step 2 of really moving towards a radical faith. Just thinking about what the name of God means. What's getting ready to happen from chapter 3, verse 11, all the way up to chapter 4, verse 16 is a series of 5 objections that Moses has to being used of God to do this thing that God has just told Moses that He is going to do. I don't know why we insist on arguing with God. I don't know why Moses did. I don't know why you do. I don't know why I do. It's foolish. But here we go. We get this window into Moses' objections. Each one shows us a little bit about the heart of Moses, but it shows us a great deal about the name of the Lord. David read for us this passage where God reveals His name. And everything that's circling around here in Moses' life, it's like a case study into the name of God and how the all-sufficiency of God makes up for any objection or excuse we may have. And so he starts with helping us reveal more of who He is. And the first thing He reveals is this: God is with us. The I am is how He calls Himself. He calls Himself the Lord. When you're looking in your Old Testaments, you'll see the word Lord written in all capital letters. That's the covenant name of God. We'll talk more about that in a second. But we roughly call it the I am. The I am is with us. Now look, here's Moses' objection. Now God just said, I'm going to use you. I'm going to deliver you from the Egyptians. Here we go. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, but I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I've sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Now, Moses' first objection, that's one that would make a lot of sense to us, right? When you really consider it. I mean, Moses has already failed at one liberation mission where he's tried to liberate Israel from Egypt, one Egyptian at a time. He's moved away from his people. He's established himself as part of the lowest class of society according to Egyptian standards. And now God is asking him to go to the most powerful man in the world and tell him to let a nation of slaves go free at great economic expense. What could possibly go wrong? Right? He's saying, what? Right? This is Moses' very sanctified way of going, huh? Like, me? Who am I? And so it's a logical question. Who am I? God's answer is so helpful here, right? God is not super interested in bolstering Moses' self-esteem. God doesn't say in the next verse, oh, Moses, man, look at your here. When we read, I will be with you, it's like he says, the I am is with you, right? In other words, it's perfect. Moses says, who am I? God says, it doesn't matter who you are. It matters that I am. That's what he's saying, right? I think sometimes we just ask the wrong question. God puts an opportunity in front of our lives, and we'll say something like, well, who am I to do this? It doesn't matter who you are. It matters who God is. Who is God? You see why that question always comes back? Why that question of what Tozer said, whatever you believe about God is the most important thing about you? Because that's what matters. Who is God? Right? And so I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make in our service to God is only choosing to serve Him based on who we think we are. One of the biggest missteps we can make in Christian discipleship and growing more mature in Christ is only ever serving based on our strengths. Where did you get that? You didn't get it from the Bible. Where did you come up with that idea? The answer has to be the world. Because I read over and over again in the Scriptures of these people who boasted not in their strength, but in their weaknesses. And so God says, I know who you are. God is not taken by surprise by who Moses is. He knows exactly who he is. And this is the upside downness of God's kingdom, right? Those who avail themselves of God's strength and worth must first abandon self-strength and any sense of self-worth. Your value to the kingdom is in your faithfulness, not in your strength. Don't get it twisted. Don't get it mixed up. God didn't pick you because you were great. Then go back and read Romans 1 and Romans 2. We spent a long time establishing that none of us are great. Remember, the theme of Romans 1 is that we all stink. The theme of Romans 2 is that we all stink, right? Second verse, same as the first. It's not because of who you are. It's because of who he is, right? But fear of man kicks in the life of Moses just like it does in our life. And it takes so many different forms, right? It can take the form of, surely there are others who would do this so much better than me. God says, I chose you because of me, not because of you. There's how can I teach this person, or how can I lead these people? You know, these people are so much more this, that, or the other than I am. Fear of man. How do I belong in these rooms? Man, imposter syndrome is one of the greatest indicators of fear of man ruling in the human heart. Right? Surely I don't belong here. Well, I felt that one a lot. Right? It's not holy. It's not good. It's not godly when we feel these things. Really, what it is fear of man. Because God speaks to Moses, and by example to us, not by pointing us to our worth, but by pointing us to his worth. He says, of course there are others, but I am with you. My strength is made perfect in your weakness. Listen, friends, God is with us. He will not call us or call Moses to a work that he will not accomplish. God desires willingness and faithfulness, and he supplies the strength and the power. And then he gives him this sign. As an aside, I love this. He says, after you've done all things, here's going to be your sign, Moses. You're going to do everything that I just said, and then you're going to come back here and you're going to worship me. I love this because we have this tendency to look for some sort of confirmation before we do something that God has called us to do it, right? God, if you really want me to do this, then make a cardinal land on my porch at 9:14 on Tuesday morning, and then I will know that it is of God. You can talk to Gideon about that one, all right? But generally speaking, that is not how things are supposed to go. That's not how things are supposed to go. It's like God is preempting Moses. Moses wants to go, well, show me a sign this is going to happen. And he goes, okay, you want a sign? Go do it. And then when you get done doing it, you're going to be right here and you're going to remember this conversation, right? Sometimes we're supposed to be called to do things that we don't have signs to do, right? Quite often, God calls us and then confirms to us through the work that this is what we're supposed to be doing. Friends, let me challenge you. It takes zero, maybe a little bit more than zero, but not much, almost zero faith to do something that you feel like you're qualified to do, compared to really trusting the nature and character of God, that His strength would be made perfect in your weakness. God is with us. And, as we just said, He is strong to do what He accomplished. Listen to Moses' second objection, verse 13. Then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is His name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And He said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. And thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Now Moses' objection is a little more that meets the eye. On the surface, in our Western eyes, it's simple. Wait, what is your name? Right? So who am I going to tell him sent me? Just some random God? Like, what's your name? Really what he's after is a picture of the revelation that he's bringing to the people. What is the message that I am bringing? And ultimately he's saying, how are they going to listen to me? We're going to get this one again, right? But here, God reveals His name in ever-increasing revelation for Moses to understand more about his true strength and his true source of strength. He calls Himself the I am that I am. It's the bottom line, right? God is who God is. Who is God? He is God. Any questions? Probably a lot, right? But that's what He's saying. I am who I am. It's also the sense of I will be what I will be, the eternal power of God, the complete self-sufficiency of God. Again, that burning bush picture, right? God needs nothing. He lacks nothing. God never fails. God is perfectly strong. And then He goes on, He says, tell them I am sent you. God is simply saying, tell them I sent you. That's it. He will do the work. And then finally, the God of their fathers is the one who sent them. They are to remember the promises that God made to their fathers, and they are to trust. And then starting in verse 16, God's going to tell him exactly how this is going to go. Look at verse 16. He says, go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey, and they will listen to your voice. And you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now, please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, He will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold and jewelry and for clothing, you shall put them on your sons and your daughters. So you shall plunder the Egyptians. Now that's a lot. It's like a summary of what's getting ready to happen, really, if you will, in the next several chapters of the book of Exodus. But there's a couple of things I want to pick up here. Chapter 3, verse 16, gives us what we would consider the name of God. In verse 16, you see that L-O-R-D, all in capital letters, right? The reality is we don't really know how to pronounce this. Anybody who tells you they do is just guessing, right? Like, we really don't. Over the years, the King James would pronounce it Jehovah, if you will. More recently, Yahweh is how people, I can't say it. I can't make myself say it. But there seems to be some variation of this that we like to pronounce, and it's just I am that I am. We call it Lord, right? But this name is so important because this is the name that's put on God's people, the name that's given to God's people. It's the personal, if you will, name of God. And so now this is this key thing. It's being used here. Definitely not the last time. It's one of the first, right? We're supposed to feel the absence all the way up through chapter 3 of this name. That they've been crying out to God, but they've never been crying out to Him by using this name. And now God has revealed His name to Moses, and the people can call Him by this name. But the other part of this that I love is chapter 3, verse 17, where God says, I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt. I mean, God promises. The question, who is God? Is God strong enough to keep His promises? Yes, He is. We know this. We've seen this. It comes back to, who do you think God is? What are you thinking about when you're thinking about God? Are you thinking of a God who is strong enough to keep His promises, who has told us that He will be with us? And if that's the God that you're thinking of, then you need to think really hard about serving Him in ways that don't make a whole lot of sense sometimes, because you're not playing to your own personal strengths. Because it's not about your strength. It's about God's strength. God is strong. He is with us. He is strong. He is able. Look at chapter 4, verse 1. Here's another objection from Moses. But behold, Moses answered, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. Moses, this time, is speaking from past failure, right? He's already experienced the people not listening to him. And so now he's remembering this, at least some part of it. It's not a huge leap to figure if 2 Israelites wouldn't listen to me, well, then maybe none of the Israelites are going to listen to me. And so the question is, what if he sticks his neck out for God and these people say, you? Man, God didn't speak for you. God didn't tell you to come to us. What in the world? God's answer again shows us what His name means. He is, and so He is able. Look at chapter 4, verse 2. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? Now, you guys know that God didn't ask him that question because He didn't actually know what was in Moses' hand, right? He knew what was in Moses' hand. He just needed Moses to say it. Moses says, a staff. The shepherd's staff, by the way, which will be very important when we get to the end of the chapter. But 3 successive pictures now through signs and wonders that God is going to show more about who He is. Verse 3, and He said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. As an aside, I've never heard anybody whose life verse is Exodus chapter 4, verse 3. Right? I want to see that on a coffee cup or a calendar one day. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. Actually, be a great coffee cup verse, because there'd be a lot of broken coffee cups. All right, verse 4. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand, and he caught it, and it became a staff in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. So, first off, right, it became a serpent and Moses ran from it. I mean, yeah, that's what you do, right? Truly, I feel like everything else God was saying, He's kind of raising His voice. Moses, come back and grab it by the tail, right? That's what He has. So now, before we get too much farther, it became a serpent. Now that word should sound familiar to us, at least from Genesis chapter 3, verse 1, that says, now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field. Right? So what is the picture? It's the picture that God is totally sovereign, even over evil. As an aside, the Egyptian king, Pharaoh, typically wore a little crown that had a picture of a cobra with his little side things sticking out. I don't know what those are called. There's a scientific term for that. We're going to call them side things today because that's the word. All right? But that's the image. Think like Jafar in Aladdin. You know that little snake thing? The snake on the post. Like snakes are indicative of power to the Egyptians. What do I tell you? Everything that you need to know about why they raised themselves up against God. But the picture here is that God is able to restrain, to destroy, and even to manipulate evil for His good, and He will always be victorious. So Moses starts with, I failed at this before. God says, I am able. Watch. And then He gives him another sign. Verse 6, the Lord said to him, Put your hand inside your cloak. And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, his hand was leprous like snow. Then God said, put your hand back inside your cloak. So he put his hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. Leprosy was very common in Egypt. It was mostly considered incurable. But God is able to do what human wisdom and human knowledge say are impossible. God in this sign says, the reason you failed before Moses is because you did it in your strength. How about, let's do it in mine? And he shows him his strength. And then, verse 9, if they will not believe even these two signs, or listen to your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. And the water that you take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. God gives Moses one to come, this picture that's going to happen. The Nile will become blood. We know this. I don't want to give, not spoiler alert, the whole river is going to become blood, not just the water that he's picking up. But there's this picture, right? A lot that we get to say about the Nile, but ultimately, suffice it to say there would be no Egypt if there were no Nile. The Nile was the lifeblood of Egyptian culture, and God is sovereign over it, showing his power to do these things. And so you'd think at this point, God has said, I'm with you, I'm strong, I'm able, that this would kind of end the argument, right? And that Moses would say, all right, Lord, let's go, I'm ready. We still got two more. Two more, right? Because we're a lot like this. So look at number 4. So number 4 thing that we learn about the name of God. I am means God is sufficient. Now I feel this objection. I feel this one a lot. I bet some of you guys do as well. Exodus 4:10, basically Moses is saying, I don't have what it takes. But then Moses in verse 10 said to the Lord, oh my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue. Now, there's not really anything, I hate to bust our Christian meme bubble. There's really not anything in here that says that Moses had some kind of speech impediment. More likely, if you ever learn a foreign language and then you take 40 years off from it, man, you forget some things. I took Spanish in high school, and the only thing I remember about Spanish is mi pollo está en la piscina, which means my chicken is in the pool. That's all I got. And it has not been 40 years. Right? That does not help me with communicating to my Spanish-speaking brothers and sisters. That's all. That's it, right? Moses was probably very fluent in Egyptian, and then he took 40 years off. So guess what happens? You get a little rusty, right? On top of that, when you live in a class of society for a long enough period of time, you begin to believe the things that people say about you, right? In other words, you got the lowest class of folks here in the shepherds. Genesis I think it's 46 tells us that shepherds were an abomination to the Egyptians, right? So what would Moses have really thought about himself? He would have really thought, man, who am I? I'm not sufficient for this work, right? I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. And so you've got Moses saying, I don't have what it takes. I feel this. I study and I labor and I wrestle with God's word, and there has never been a week I can ever think of where I felt like I've done enough work. Not one. But if I've learned anything about ministry, is I'd rather that to the alternative. Because from there, God can use his strength in me, right? So for some reason or the other, Moses didn't believe that he was sufficient. And again, look at what God says. God doesn't say, Moses, man, you're great. You're such a brilliant orator and person. There is no question that when you get to Egypt, you're just going to wow people with your amazing intellect and stunning eloquence. That's not what God says at all. In fact, he doesn't even argue that Moses isn't eloquent. It's fantastic. If you're looking for something about self-esteem, you're probably not going to find it in Exodus 3 and Exodus 4. As Moses says, I'm slow of speech, and God says, who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute, or deaf, or seeing, or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? And then verse 12, now, therefore, go, and I will be your mouth, and teach you what you shall speak. Friends, listen. Lack of confidence is not the same thing as humility. I think sometimes we can get those things confused. Lack of confidence is lack of confidence. Humility is humility. I am supposed to abandon the confidence that I might have in my own abilities in my own intellect, in my own eloquence, in my own sufficiency, absolutely. But I am also supposed to, at the same time, not just be this empty vessel in which no confidence remains. I am supposed to be a person who is so fully focused on God that I have 100% confidence that the God who made my mouth can somehow do something amazing and make this book make sense to you. Huh? That's what I believe in. That's what I want you to believe in. You want radical faith? Don't mix up lack of confidence and humility. Those two things are not the same. Moses had no confidence in his ability, and God didn't want him to. God wanted him to have confidence in his ability. And so he tells him, that's what we said earlier. How often have we selected ministry areas or considered ministry calling based on what we consider to be our own strengths? How often do we turn down opportunities because we don't feel like we're able? In those moments, I want to at least, friends, can I at least challenge you to, before you say no, answer the question, who is God? Who is God? I don't want a church full of talented people. I want a church full of faithful people who are obedient, who are willing to listen and consider the voice of God, whose strength is made perfect in our weakness. And from that, I want to be willing to go in radical faith and do things that the only explanation would have been, that has to be God. There is no other possible explanation for why this thing came out of that person's mouth or why this person was able to do this thing. That's the only explanation that works in the church. We've placed far too much value on talent. God places value on faithfulness. It's a simple question. Who is God? One more objection. Chapter 4, verse 13. We're going to see God, the I am means God is king. Chapter 4, verse 13. But he said, "Oh, my Lord, please send someone else." Finally, here we go. Please send someone else. It's fancy Hebrew for I don't want to. Right? And if you think about it, Moses could have had many compelling reasons for not doing this, right? I mean, he's got at least one son. He probably has two by this time. He's got a family at home, right? He's got a really busy job taking care of sheep. He's already run away from these people, and he knows they wanted to kill him for a substantial period of time. That's a motivating factor to not go back to a place, right? He's got lots of really valid reasons. And so what it comes down to is, God, I don't want to do it. Send someone else. Moses gives simple reasoning, right? He knows it's going to be hard. He knows it's going to require going to an uncomfortable place. He knows it's going to require sacrificing more than he wants to sacrifice, and it's going to require his whole life being flipped upside down, and he doesn't want that. And for the first time in a chapter and almost 3/4, God gets angry. Look at verse 14. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And he said, Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know he can speak well. Behold, he's coming out to meet you. And when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And I will be your mouth and with his mouth. And I will teach you both what to do. He shall speak to you, for you, to the people. And he shall be your mouth. And you shall be as God to him. I love how God answers this. He says, I'm not really asking, Moses. It's kind of the short version, right? I think sometimes we can get ministry calling confused. I know it feels kind of vague and unclear, but let me tell you something. A calling is not optional. God has called you to do a thing. He's not asking. He's telling. And this is what he's doing. God's not coming to Moses in the burning bush and saying, Moses, if you don't mind and you're not too busy, would you mind please doing this thing for me? That's not it at all, right? And that's the inexplicable part of having a calling of any kind, really. There is this in a ministry calling. If you ever wonder what it meant to be called to ministry, let me get to the best job I can to explain it, because it may be that God's calling you, not to vocational ministry. I hope so. I pray the Lord would call everybody to do that. That'd be fantastic. But when you're called, there is this inner sense of compulsion that if I don't do this thing, I'm going to die. That's calling. That there is in me this desire that I cannot explain to do something that seems sometimes incredibly horrific because God is glorious and He's called me to do it. This is why Spurgeon once said, you want to see a man who's called to ministry? Show me a man who's doing ministry without getting paid for it or receiving a title for it, and I'll show you a man who's called to ministry. In other words, the surest way to see if a person's called, for instance, to be a pastor is if they are already doing things that look like a pastor. Surest way to see if a man is called to serve as a deacon is looking for people who are already doing deacon-like things. Surest way to find somebody who's called to picket, serve on Wednesday night. Did they just jump in and get to work serving on Wednesday night? They're probably called to do this thing, right? There is in us this compulsion that we do this because the king has told me to do it. And I must obey my king. My father has told me to do it, and I must listen. It never works in my favor to disobey my father. That's what it means to be called. That's it, right? And so, systematically, with each one of these objections, God answers with a picture of who He is, and He finishes with the fact that He is King. And finally, we get this picture of God in the beginning. We move from the picture of God to an explanation of the name of God in this big middle, and then finally He compels him to obedience. Once you get the vision of God, you get this understanding of who God is, you are compelled to obedience. Look at chapter 4, verse 17. He says, "And take in your hand this staff, with which you shall do the signs." It's like God says, go and take your staff with you. Right? He's sending him out, the staff. Common shepherd's staff. A literal visual picture of the weakness of Moses in his hand as he goes before the most powerful man in the world. Right? Shepherds were considered common beneath the haughty Egyptian culture. And so God sends Moses with a visual picture of Moses' own weakness and ability, which will eventually become a symbol for the redemption of His people. I bet we could think of another piece of wood that was a symbol of weakness that became a picture of redemption for our people. And so you see Moses going out with his staff in his hand after 5 objections, each of which God has answered. So what is Exodus 3:1 to 4:17 telling us to do? What is God teaching us to do here? Trust in the Lord. Put your confidence in Him and then obey radically and uncomfortably. Stop thinking that the Christian life is about your comfort. For Pete's sake, where did you get that idea? You didn't get it from the Scriptures. The pattern hasn't changed. God doesn't call a few select Christians to a radical faith. God calls Christians to a radical faith. God saved us so that we would truly love, truly trust the one who is the great I am. Friends, consider how similar our excuses for obedience can be to the excuses that Moses gave. How many of these have you said? I think I checked every box here for what it's worth. How many of these you said in your day? Who am I to do this? I'm not strong enough to do this. You know, there are variations that we use for this one. That would take energy or time or resources that I don't have. What about I'm not able to do this? What about I'm not sufficient to do this? What about this one? I don't want to do it. This is going to be hard, and I don't want hard. It's too inconvenient. It would require too much change. It would require too much sacrifice. It would require too much of this, or I don't have enough of that. And in every one of those things, what is the common factor? I am looking at me. And God says, I am. That's what He says. In the midst of this, God responds. He has given us His name. He has given us the very presence of the Holy Spirit, and He's given us a sign. But it wasn't a serpent. It wasn't that we throw the staff down and it become a serpent. No, it was that we have beholden the picture of the one who was lifted up in the wilderness. We have Christ. We have a picture of our redemption, the one who was hung on a cross to satisfy the wrath of God, not so that you would be comfortable, but so that you would have a radical faith. It wasn't the sign of a leprous hand. It was in the curing of the greatest disease that you will ever have. It's in the fact that you, who were once dead in sin, have been resurrected, made alive in Christ. You have that sign. It wasn't through turning water into blood. It was through the shedding of His own blood. so that we might be reconciled to him, and so give his people true and eternal life. You see, this name, I am, doesn't just stop in Exodus, right? It doesn't even just stop in the Old Testament. Go forward, read the Gospels, and look at the way that Jesus described himself. I am the vine. I am the resurrection and the life. In every one of those, God is making a statement to us. The Lord is teaching us, instructing us. He is, or he isn't. What comes to your mind when you think of God? And how does your definition of God dictate your willingness to sacrifice for his glory? Or are you just too full of excuses? That's where the rubber hits the road in this passage. It's a simple question. Is God able? If so, then friends, please, when God puts something in your path to do, and you don't feel sufficient for the task, or you don't feel like you have the energy or the time to do it, or you feel like God may be better off using someone else, I'm not telling you to say yes right away. I'm telling you to commit to doing one thing. Would you commit to considering that actually doing that thing that God puts in front of you may actually be what God wants you to do, because all of those excuses are true, and because he desires to have his strength made perfect in your weakness? We are supposed to abandon confidence in our own strength, but that does not mean we abandon confidence. It means we take that confidence and we place it in the eternal worth and value of Jesus Christ, so that we will radically serve him all the rest of our days. The God who is calls us. What will you do? May radical obedience be the rule, not the exception, in this church and among us as Christians. Now, if you're here and you're not a believer, you're here and all this sounds crazy to you, there is a first step of radical obedience that you must take, and it is this: you must surrender any hope in your own ability to earn favor with God. You cannot do enough good things to earn favor to the God who is holy and self-sufficient and dangerous. He does not need you, but he has sent his Son as a picture of the fact that you can be reconciled to him, because he may not need you, but let me tell you something. You need him, and Jesus Christ has made a way that we might be reconciled to the Father. It begins with repentance, turning from your sin, and trusting in the Lord to save you. God help me is the best sinner's prayer I've ever heard in my whole life. Would you pray that? He is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Christian, who is God? Is he able? Then trust him. May we trust him together. Would you pray with me?